Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today it is time to talk about my worst books of 2023. And 2023 in general was not a great reading year for me. If you saw my video where I talked about my reading statistics, you will know that my average rating for 2023 was at a 3.1 star, which is like a good chunk beneath my usual average, which tends to be somewhere between 3.6 or 3.7 stars. And so yeah, part of the reason was I just didn't have that many high rated books. I had a ton of like middle ground 3-star books, but also part of the reason is that I just had a bunch of badly rated books, and we're gonna be talking about those in this video. A sign also that this year in reading was worse than usually is that usually I don't have that many books where I just want to rant about them by the end of the year. So usually I kind of fill this type of video also with some books that I ended up maybe even loving, but that somewhat ended up being a disappointment to me. So books that I generally enjoyed, but that I kind of expected more of. However, there will be none of that in this video. This video will just be filled with books that I just absolutely couldn't stand this year. And since I need to rant about 7 books in total, let's get started. This video will be in order, so I will start with the book that I gave the best rating, that I enjoyed the most, and end with the one that I enjoyed the least. And the first of these books is just a book that, to be honest, was just nothing special. Like, there's nothing in particular, I think, what I remember of this one that I particularly disliked about the book, but it was just so underwhelming that I didn't even give it my usual, yeah, it was fine, whatever 3-star, but I ended up giving it 2.5 stars, and that was The Art of Prophecy by Wesley Chu, which was the first book in the War Arts saga. This story, if I remember correctly, is about a kind of grizzled old warrior who is given the task to help a chosen one survive because people want to kill the chosen one or something. But like the people from the same society as him, so not like the evil guys, but someone else. To be honest, this book was so not memorable that I hardly remember anything that happened in it. Do I still want to continue on with the series? Yeah, kind of. I still have it in my series TBR chart for now, but it was just really not memorable. Like, I don't know if it even deserves to be on this list, because like, it's almost worse, you know? It's almost worse when a book is just unremarkable, you know? Because at least books that you hate on, you remember. But this one, not at all. Moving on, I will just very quickly jump through my second book, which was a 2-star, and that was Prisoner of the Iron Tower by Sarah Ashe, which was the second book in the Tears of Artemun. I already unhauled all of the books in the series except for the third one. I do still want to read the third one. My main reason for not liking this book, I think the first one was actually on my worst books of 2022 list, so you know, sometimes I enjoy reading terrible books. But anyway, the reason why I don't like this is because every single character always acts in the stupidest way possible, but it doesn't feel like they act that way because it's in their character, but it feels like they just have to act as stupid as possible to move the plot along, and it's really fucking annoying. I hate it. I'm still gonna read the third book because they're at least fast reads. They're like 600 pages each, these books, but I think I usually read them in like 2 or 3 days. Then I have another book that I also don't remember a lot about, that I had an arc of, and that's The Thick and the Lean by Chana Porter. And if I remember correctly, the stuff that happened in this one, or what this one was about, is it was a kind of speculative literary fiction set in a world where not eating is very much connected to piety, as well as, I don't remember if being sexually promiscuous was part of being pious or not, but there was something there as well. It was queer as well, I believe. I think this would be the main book actually that's on here, because it was just a big disappointment, because the premise of this book sounded so interesting and there could have been so much done with that. However, there was nothing there for me in the end. But yeah, the main reason why I gave it 2 stars, I think there was some stuff that just made me really uncomfortable. I don't remember what it was exactly anymore. And then overall, it was just like the premise that was really, really interesting, but that then ended up just falling completely flat in the end. So yeah. First 3 books on this list kind of just, they're just not good. They're just kind of disappointing, kind of just fizzled out. However, with the last 4 books, we're finally talking about shit. Also, except for the next book that I'm talking about, the other 3 I do have reviews for, which I will leave linked down below. But, next one. The next book that was just a big disappointment and that I just couldn't stand in the end was Sister Maiden Monster by Lucy A. Snyder. I was really excited for this one. I mean, first of all, just as a caveat, I am not a big horror reader. And not because I can't handle it or anything, it just doesn't necessarily always interest me. The stuff that does interest me is more in the direction of gothic horror or literary horror. But, you know, just purely atmospheric horror, not exactly the biggest fan. However, this book sounded really interesting to me, so I got it. This is set during kind of the apocalypse where everyone becomes sick. And the start of this book, I think, was very much written during or just after the pandemic, and it also just kind of calls back to the pandemic and to the public health regulations that were going on, and they're like happening again and so on, so you should be masked, etc. And so during this outbreak of the sickness that no one knows what it is, we follow 3 women in 3 different parts of this story. The first woman we follow is Erin, who is a very quiet and closeted person who becomes sick of this illness with this virus that no one knows what it is. And after she becomes sick, she acquires a taste for brains and blood, because that is basically what this illness does with you. It turns you into a cannibal, basically. And we love cannibalism, okay? Especially literary cannibalism. Then the second character we follow is Savannah, who is a professional BDSM switch. And she starts hearing voices of some eldritch masters. And the third character that we follow is Mareva, who is kind of growing these tumors and who seems to be playing some type of divine role within this entire apocalypse thing. And so you follow these 3 women in the 3 different parts of the book, and I don't know, maybe it's just something that horror does, but first of all, the story goes absolutely nowhere. It just, even the single stories, they don't really, and I'm not someone who always needs plot to move forward. Like, there's plenty of books where other people's biggest complaint about those books is that nothing is happening, that nothing is moving forwards, that there's no plot whatsoever. And usually I'm like, that's because plot is not the story of that book, or like the point of that book. So I'm not someone who always needs plot, and for whom nothing is happening can sometimes like lead me to pick up a book. This book for me was the negative nothing was happening, because there was something happening. There was a lot of gory stuff that just I don't know, like, I love sexual, gory stuff in books. I don't know how else to put it. You know, like, maybe not sexual, but, you know, sensual, gore type things can be really intriguing to me. And it felt like this book wanted to do that, except it didn't. I also absolutely couldn't stand the writing. It was so basic and just didn't fit whatsoever and was just boring as fuck to read. Also, the way that this book just included the COVID-19 pandemic, I don't know why. It's not the usual, you know, don't include pop culture references because it will date and age your book, but something about the way those things were put in there just really pulled me out of the story. So, I don't know, I really didn't like that, and it just completely fizzled out. The book completely fizzled out. The atmosphere wasn't there that I expected. The writing wasn't there that I expected. It didn't have plot. It didn't have amazing symbolism. I mean, probably it did, but it felt completely flat. So, like, anything that this book could have had and could have done was just not there and not properly done. So, yeah, just absolute big fucking massive disappointment. Couldn't stand it. And I will probably, after this video, unhaul it, to be honest. Next one, we have one of the books, like the last 3 books actually, are some of my most anticipated releases of 2021. And all of them were big fucking massive disappointments. The first I have is the Daughters of Istar by Hadia El-Spy, which is the first book in the Al-Maxa duology. I will still read the second book in this duology. But yeah, only because it's just a duology. If it was a trilogy, I would be like, fucking cutting my losses, I don't care. This is a duology where once again we follow 2 different women. It's Egyptian inspired, and we follow 2 women. One of the 2 is Nihal, who dreams of attending this weaving academy. Weaving is basically elemental bending from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's literally the same, which I don't usually care about, you know, magic systems in different fantasy worlds being similar to each other, because not everything needs to be original all the time, and a lot of times you can work with familiar stuff and still make it really interesting. This wasn't one of those cases. Anyway, so she wants to attend the Weaving Academy. However, in this world, women, first of all, aren't allowed to vote, and they also aren't allowed to attend the Weaving Academy to, you know, become proficient in their magic. Or at least there's like not a lot of women allowed there. I think there was a like special platoon for women, but generally speaking, they're only allowed to go there with the permission of their father or their husband. And so yeah, she's forced into this marriage. However, her husband does actually allow her to go to this academy in the end. And then the second woman that we follow is the former lover, I believe, of the arranged husband of the first woman. And she is also part of this movement that's basically the suffragettes within this world. She's part of this movement of activists, of women fighting for women's rights. And so through Georgina, who is already part of the activists, Nihal, who is the rich lady, then becomes part of the activists as well. I did have a full rant review of this one, so if you want to know my exact thoughts, I will leave that link down below. But basically, this was worse than Feminism 101. Because Feminism 101 books are needed, you know? There are people who still need them, but just everything fell so flat. First of all, something that wasn't acknowledged hardly at all in this first book was the discrepancies between the 2 women, where one of the 2 women came from a rich family and always was like, woe is me, I am the poorest of the poor, I have a terrible life, never acknowledging and never being forced to acknowledge by the narrative the privileges that she does have. as a rich woman. Like, for example, the way that if she is caught for being part of this activist group, it won't hardly matter to her. And so she becomes a lot more radical, but radical in a way where she doesn't put herself in danger, but the other women within this activist group who maybe can't get away with as much as she can get away with, and she just doesn't get it. So yeah, intersectionality just wasn't existent within this story. Then just the relationship between Nihal, so the rich woman, and her arranged husband, I didn't like it all, because the arranged husband actually was like usually really understanding, but the narrative still kind of treated him shittily constantly, even though he was very much working within his own framework. It just didn't like that whatsoever. The way the magic was handled was terrible. It was so fucking boring. I didn't like the writing style. And then I think, was this? No, it was, at least wasn't two first-person perspectives. The characters were boring, and then there was something with the magic that happened that I can't talk about, that also happened actually in Avatar, but here it was treated as a good thing. In Avatar it was very much treated like a bad thing. So yeah, just terrible. Just so terrible. By the way, it should be treated as a bad thing, the thing that happened. I hated this. I did not enjoy a second of it. It was a fast read, so I am going to read the second book, just so I can properly shit on it and maybe see if good things come of it in the end. Because, you know, sometimes it's hard for me to give up on series, especially since my, you know, experience with the Poppy War, where I hated the first two books and loved the last one. So yeah, absolutely trash though. Another trash book that actually had some drama surrounding it on TikTok, but I will not be going into the drama. I will just be going into my personal experience with this book and my personal thoughts. The Sun and Devoid by Gabriela Romero La Cruz. The main thing about this one is that it was just incredibly badly written. The plot happened, or stuff happened because plot happened. There was absolutely nothing ever explored about the time in between important plot events. The character relationships completely developed off screen, hardly ever on screen. The colonial history of this series was just unexplored and non-existent. By the way, I forgot to tell you what this was about. This, once again, is about two women. Can we see a trend, kind of? There's plenty of books that I did enjoy with two women, okay? I just feel the need to defend myself. But this is about two young women. Both are of races that are native to the world in here, or the continent that this is set on. However, both of the races have been colonized long ago. However, within the last generation there was a big war of independence, and now the colonizers have left. However, the colonial structures and the colonial, you know, people, or a lot of the colonial people, those that were born on this continent, are still there and still kind of rule society. So South America, because this is South American inspired fantasy. And so both of our main characters are from different of the colonized races. One of them, after the death of her father, goes in search for her grandmother, and on the way to go to find her, she is attacked by these very gruesome monsters, and now she is saved by her grandmother, but now has to do her grandmother's bidding, and maybe finds out that the family that she always looked for isn't exactly what she expected. And then the other one is a girl fleeing from an arranged marriage. And so, yeah, that's the basic premise. And then there's a bunch of Chosen One and Dark Gods Rising stuff going on as well. And that's actually my last complaint. This story was incredibly predictable, but also like there was no warranted stuff, like nothing within the narrative where I would be like, okay, I understand why this character is the Chosen One. However, it's so obvious that they're gonna end up being the Chosen One who's gonna do the thing and do the do and whatever. There was no subversion of tropes whatsoever. The writing was boring as fuck. It was like, for how much was going on within this story, I was so bored. So bored. But yeah, I wish I enjoyed this. Also because I have the gorgeous Illumicrate edition and I don't really want to unhaul it, but it's like, look at this. But also, why should I keep a book that I hate? The last book on this list, however, is also a book that I can't really unhaul because I got this signed and personalized because the author actually lives in Austria and in Vienna and did its signing at an English bookstore. And the book I'm talking about is the 11th Cycle. So this one, I don't know how much I should rant within this video because I filmed a full 1 hour rant review of this one. Full hour. Just full hour of ranting. What is this about? This is a grimdark fantasy, and like every cycle there's a seed being born. Not that much happening with the seed so far in this first book. And in this first book we follow 4 different characters from 4 different backgrounds. Some of them know each other, others do not. And they're kind of doing their stuff. This is one of those fantasy books that you can't really explain what it's about because not that much is happening in the first book aside from setup. I mean, there's a lot of plot, but like the plot isn't that relevant in the bigger picture, kind of. But yeah. So, personally, writing wasn't for me. The characters, if I remember correctly, were kind of dull, but the main thing that I just didn't enjoy was the sexual assault. This, I talked to the author at the signing, and he was very lovely actually. So like, nothing against the author. He seemed like a decent dude. I don't know, like as much as you can gather someone's character from like a 10-minute interaction. But he did at the signing talk a lot about how he didn't want to fall into the trap of grimdark, of like adding unnecessary sexual assault into his books. This was one of the most unnecessary and brutal sexual assaults that I have ever read in a book. I hated it. It sucks. There's a disabled character, and the way the body of the disabled character is described constantly as well is just so voyeuristic and terrible, to be honest. There's unchallenged racism, both internalized as well as external, like unchallenged, not as in challenged by the characters, but by the narrative, unchallenged racism. This book made me so angry. This book made me so incredibly angry. The author did actually write me afterwards, because he does still follow me on Twitter or X or whatever, afterwards, telling me that he's sorry I feel the way that I feel, and like if it's okay for him to watch my video, and I was like, well, you can watch that part if you want. But yeah, I don't want to talk about it anymore, to be honest. I hated this book. I hated it so much. And the sad thing is, I was so intrigued by this book at the beginning of it. Like, I was so intrigued because the writing was different. It wasn't quite for me. The exposition wasn't necessarily done in a way where I enjoyed it a lot. The exposition was very exposition-y and not very much done within the story. And it was done in like epigraphs. I think that's what it's called, like these little things at the beginning of the chapters. But these things hardly ever had anything to do with the stuff that was happening within the chapters, so you just had that random world building detail that you instantly forgot because it didn't play a role within the story. And anyway, worst book of 2023. And with that, please tell me in the comments down below what were your worst books of 2023. Did you read any of the books that I talked about in this video, and did you feel similarly to me? If you enjoyed this video, what do you think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing? All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where you read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!